Just because, look, just because it was the afternoon route, it was running. In the morning, it had been really.
They were catching up. The double run.
Oh, man. Oh,
Make it stop, make it stop.
My tie looks pretty in the newspaper though. I feel real good about that.
Your dude?
My shirt tie, or my
Oh, yes.
tie combination looked really good. Felt strong about that.
That combination look good.
And I went from being the worst attorney in the world and a racist in the eyes of my client to being a good attorney and not a racist by the end of the trial. So, small victory.
well, you won.
Small victories.
You're all right, Ms. Wilson. Do we need to unlock the glass door, please?
We'll be framing you next week.
Huh?
One on Lloyd and one on Williamsburg.
Didn't get any trouble. Give you time. Yeah, I will. I'm trying to get it all situated now.
You wouldn't have made me look so fat on the front page.
How'd you pick that?
You're a good girl. I won't have a thing back in front of the thing.
Thank you for that. See? I always try to think
You didn't go in. Yeah, doing all kinds of
she probably would say, yeah, go ahead, do it, go ahead, do it.
stuff. Now it just started rolling.
She'll never know this one might need it. Oh, that's gone.
Are you starting to see traffic increase around your house?
No, she didn't. Because I'm right now at Wilson, two driveway and
Okay.
yeah, my house has always been busy. Going to spring first thing in the morning.
Yes, ma'am, I'm gonna unplug this till time comes. I just unplugged it. Oh, okay. It's okay. All right, cool. Yeah, I can take it whatever. How you doing?
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this work session for the Wilson County Board of Education to order. For the public who is joining us, this meeting is being live streamed through the Wilson County Schools YouTube channel. And the public can also view the meeting through the links on the Wilson County Schools Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, as well as the Wilson County Schools website. Members of the board, I seek your approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Powell,
I move we approve the agenda for the work session of Wilson County Board of Education dated March the 28th, 2022.
Second.
it has been moved by Mrs. Powell, seconded by Mr. Breen and Mr. Mercer, that the agenda for the work session of the Board of Education for today, March 28, 2022, be approved. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. And let me, for the record, indicate that the board composition is 6 members today. Mrs. Barnes is under the weather and not joining us. So instead of 7, there are 6 members in attendance. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed by a moment of silence. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the board, it's that time of the year that we look at our budget in preparation to be submitted to the county commissioners for their consideration. And so the administration has prepared the budget that you have had a chance to look at. And following the budget items, we will be going into long-range facility planning as a continuation of the discussions that we have been having. So a lot on the plate, but it's all doable, and I know that with your direction, we're going to get to the point that we need to be without any question. So that being said, I'm going to turn the meeting over to the superintendent so that we can begin with the budget as you have prepared for us for consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members, and others. Mr. Stanley is here to walk us through the current expense budget. I will tell you just from what you've had a chance to look at, same format has been the case in the past several years. It is a very flat budget in terms of information that's changed. Art will point out a few things here or there. In reality, the differences are driven by cost of living increases from the state level for hospitalization, retirement, and those kinds of things. So, Art, if you just walk us through the document.
What y'all's first page is, oh, I see it, what Ms. Boyette's got. First page is basically your revenue page. And you can see that we are, the county gave us this current year $23,135,788. We're proposing $24,798,882 for a difference of $1,663,094. That's about a 7.2% increase. The rest are fines and forfeitures. You can see we're busting $250 for that, $500 for some miscellaneous stuff for fines and forfeitures, interest about $15,000, miscellaneous revenue $2,000, and then $1.5 million of our fund balance will be put in this budget at this time. That pretty much is the revenue side. Y'all have any specific questions on that? If not, we'll flip to the expense side of the house. On the expense side, and Dr. Mills alluded to this already, based on the budget bill that was passed and signed on November 18th, for the 22-23 school year, it was already put in that it'd be a 2.5% pay raise, or the higher of the $15 an hour or 2.5%. So as you go through this, we factored in the 2.5% or the $15 per hour. The retirement rate right now is going to average out for this fiscal year at $22.89. It is projected to get a $24.19. The hospitalization this year was $7,019. It's projected to get a $7,397, so that's a pretty big increase. So most of the increases you see in here are related to the benefits. So we can take the first page, and if you just look at total 001, you can see it went up $210,000. Now, what we did on teacher supplements, we did increase those 3%, just to make sure we got everybody covered, because the average teacher this past year got 2.5%. Some got higher, some got lower, obviously, but the average around 2.5%. To be cautious, we did 3%. And coaching, we increased that a little bit. We added some sports. I know lacrosse got added this year. Again, the retirement rate, the hospitalization rate, all that's dictated by the 2419, 7,397. St. Charles administration, it went up 141, and again, it deals with all those same rates. Instructional support, Pretty much same thing. We did lower the custodian, bus drivers, and temperature takers that were COVID. When COVID came out, unfortunately, 2 years ago, for the 2021 school year, we paid those temperature takers out of ESSER funds. We could not do that this school year, so we put them in local. We feel like that most of these folks are part-time that were doing it now. They pretty much are the exceptions in human resources, and they're all retired part-time people. So we didn't feel like we needed the whole $253,000, so we lowered it to $60,000. That was the biggest decrease on the page. If y'all got any questions, please stop me as we go along. Page 2. If you look at school building administration, those are the supplements that pay the assistant principals and the principals. And again, that's pretty much increased about 2.5%, and then the benefit increases that were there. For 07 instructional support personnel, we did increase that 2.5%, but we know we're going to be one short of paying the state back this year, so that's why you see the increase of $67,000 there. The instructional support pay for your media, your guidance, your nurses, social workers, psychologists, et cetera. And we know we're going to be one short on state public school fund now, so we went ahead and put that one up front in the local. Non-contributory benefits, that's the people who are on local funds that we have to pay longevity to. Or if you're on federal funds and your local funds and you leave your position, then we got to pay you annual leave. Yes, we had to pay it for federal funds. I don't agree with that, but that was something that goes back over 20 years. Federal doesn't pay that anymore. So that's why those funds are there, it's mainly to cover the longevity for our locally paid people, as well as the annual leave payouts if people do leave on either local or federal funds. The next page, page 3, basically no changes on that page except for just basic retirement increases. And everything else pretty much stayed the same. Ditto on page 4, no changes there. We did decrease the travel reimbursement to $575, but again, no change, really no changes there. On page 5, transportation of pupils, that's just the basic increases for the 2.5% in the benefit increases. The next page, same old, just salary increases as we go along. We did, the skills worker is increased a little bit more than 2.5%, but he was under budget this year. So his correct salary is the one that you're seeing there under that column, but he was under budget a little bit this year. Yes, ma'am.
Is that, are you talking about 175, 706, 170?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, is that, like, which position is that?
That is a mechanic's position at the bus garage.
That's what I had read,
Yep.
but I thought we'd make sure. Okay.
And let's see, if you go to the next page under Board of Education 800, you will see a decrease in that 311 of $254,000. We've decreased the legal fees based on the way the current contract reads. So it's instead of being 604, it went to 350.
Okay.
And the rest of it probably is pretty much zeros with no changes in the document.
Nothing like finding $250,000 in your budget, isn't that weird?
The rest of the pages have zero increases, but I don't know if you got any specific questions on any specific line item in there or not. So page 8, there were no increases. Page 9.
In 807, 211, only a $32 increase, so that whole section only increased by 32, that was,
Yes, pulling from that $2,500, and it is the retirement increase for 2419 that went from 2289 to 2419.
okay.
And it's pulling from that $2,500 there.
And same page, 806, the distance learning, Rust distance learning, is that a grant that we earned, or is that equipment we had to buy? Tell me what that is.
That is a grant that we got through the Rural Utilities Services. It is a grant. The grant currently is $302,000 that we are getting. We have to match that grant, and this is the match for that grant.
Okay, this is a match.
And it does, Ms. Boyette, it does go to buy equipment. There are several schools that money's gone to. Off the top of my head, I could not tell you the schools right now. Dr. Wilson may be able to tell you that, but it has gone to several schools. The equipment has been ordered.
One of them was Springfield, I remember, I don't remember.
All of our schools that are considered rural,
Uh-huh.
so none of our schools in the city received it, but all of, the first grant did a few of the schools, like the high schools, and then the second grant that we got added the middle school. The first one had high schools and one or two middle schools, and then we added the elementary schools in the second one.
Page 10, again, there's no increases. It's same old stuff as well as page 11 and page 12. And again, when y'all got specific items on, specific questions on specific items, pretty much takes care of current expense, and capital outlay is just the standard $1 million that we always ask for.
On 809, the stipend paid for athletics, band, and chorus is $7,000. That seems low.
You said 809.
Yes, sir.
There's the majority of the money they get is on the first page under 01.
Okay.
I'd have to look at what that one is specifically,
Yeah,
but
but you
majority,
mentioned it when we
yeah,
went up, when you went up.
majority of their supplements is in the 01 category.
Okay. Question, I've been on the board, it'll be 8 years now. How often do we compare how our athletics, band, and chorus stipends for people compare to surrounding counties?
It varies, and with all the changes we've had, we probably could benchmark with some others around us to kind of see. That question came up recently with some other things. We've kind of done it in a few areas. Probably the last year and a half hasn't been the best time to benchmark with anything.
Right.
But it's probably time to revisit and do that now. And plan for it if we're gonna do any adjustments over time with anything like we would other areas. The issue that we run into with this budget is it's really flat if you look at it from what we're trying to do. But if the goal is to try and catch back up and do some things, then we definitely are gonna need some additional funding to go back up through that with some of the issues we run into with layout and stipends and other things for some of our other areas outside of the main ones we talk about with capital or classrooms and things such as that. It would take some staging in to do that.
I know I had heard of some, maybe it was COVID related, maybe not, difficulty finding people.
Yeah, period.
For
In some
coaching or
areas.
for
Yeah.
band.
Athletics, I think we've kept an eye on because it is much more publicized. Band, of course, has been harder to do because it is so variable. And I know also the impact of that from COVID with the participation in some of those areas as well. So it might be a good time to take a peek at all that.
So would that, you're taking a peek, would that be with this particular budget, or? would
No,
that
not
be-
with this budget.
That's gonna be for the future
That'll
moving forward?
be for the future. Again, I think the issue we're gonna run into with the current expense right now is that we've got some built-in increases like we normally see from the state with retirement, hospitalization, and so forth. And then we've got our current request with capital to the commissioners. So we've got that, but we've also got, you're going to hear things about the ESSER funds and other things such as that too, the timing of it. So it's probably a little bit of a timing issue to go back and address some of that right now. I would spend our time this next year when things are probably a little more stable in terms of enrollments and programs and participation to look at what your needs would be for some of these other programs. This year has been much more variable than the year before to try and figure out what's coming and going in terms of populations and participation from talking with principals and what we've seen as well. So benchmarking right now would probably not be ideal. So next year, I'm hopeful that'll be more of a normal year to talk to others around us and also talk to our own folks. For the restart we've had this year, it's just been so unpredictable.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Mr. Letchworth, in our meeting last week, did we say that there were 3 schools that still had fuel heated furnaces?
Lee Woodard, Springfield, Lee Woodard, Fike, and
Springfield, Lucama, Rock Ridge, Fike High School, and Lee Woodard.
yeah.
5.
Lee Woodard and Fike will be the only ones left if we were to approach about the gas lines for those
So
three.
all right, so we were looking at 3.
Mhm.
And then all the other schools are serviced with natural gas?
Yes, and we run dual fuel at those too, just in case gas were to go off, but yet they had natural gas.
So the line item under 812, 421, is that the fuel for those 5 schools, the 120,000?
Yes.
Yes.
It is? So it's actually, so the fuel for those 5 schools is actually a lot more than what the natural gas is running us.
It depends on what the price of fuel is and how bad the winter is. We've had a mild winter, so that can change. But that's kind of an average.
So it should go down once we get those 3 lines that we talked about, and then that would only leave 2.
That's correct.
But you're correct, long-term, that would be a savings over time. And it would take out the variability of what we could get hit with that fuel cost, which would go to help do things like we're talking about in the budget right now. Because that would be a fair amount of savings that could be applied to something on an ongoing basis.
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at it and thinking, yeah, if we've got 26 schools and 5 of them are serviced with fuel oil, then that leaves 21 that are serviced with natural gas at 317, and the 5 are
Take it.
120.
Take up a third.
Yeah, so, I mean, if we can get them switched over, that's a pretty significant savings.
Yeah.
And I have just one comment to make. I'm hopeful, and I know things can change, that our charter school transfer of $4 million is going to be the same as it was last year, so I know that can fluctuate a little bit too.
Mr. Stanley's,
Every year it seems to increase.
Mr. Stanley's been looking at those numbers.
Based on what we have seen, I'll show Dr. Neal's how I came up with the number, but based on what we're seeing, we think that 4.2 will be sufficient enough. I don't know if y'all know, but there's a new one slate jumping up in August.
Is that through the spot, or is that a different?
No,
I know that they have put in
separate.
an application in the past.
It's separate in the name and illusion. It's going to be an overall school. It's going to start off as a K-2 school, and then it will add 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade every year after that. So we're projecting 138 children, which we have factored that in. Sally B will probably be at an 11th grade next year, We're projecting 50 students there. And so we're looking at an increase of 184 kids, all in all, when it's all said and done. So we think that 4.2 is going to be enough. Based on where we're at right now and where we started the year off with, it has a tendency to go down. And it may start off the year at, say, 1,900, but it has a tendency during the course of the year to go down. Kids come back to us and et cetera. So I think usually we started at 18-something and we're at 1,795 right now. So the number comes down, and that's why we feel like we'll have enough money for the 4.2.
Because we're hopeful that they do return.
Yes.
And that's hopefully, I'm hoping that will level off too, so that's good to know.
Any other questions? Madam Chair, board members?
All right, board members, do you have any other questions? So this is the current expense fund, and so if there are no other questions, we'll look at the capital outlay. If you want to go to that one now.
We typically bring that one to
This is-
you after
this
the.
is- Right, this is
after
just the
approval
typical
from the
that we have asked
commission.
for, the 1 million.
Mhm.
Okay. Members of the board, this is the budget that is projected for the next school year. It will come to us at our next meeting for final approval so that it can go to the county commissioners to meet the deadline. I think it's May,
It is.
early May, when it is required to be at them for their consideration. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, we thank you, Mr. Stanley, and for all the people in the finance department who handle all of the intricacies of budget. We thank you for the fine work that you have done. And we will now move on with the agenda to the long-range facilities planning for the schools.
Art was really brief this time. We had to cut him down. He was so talkative in our sessions.
He's usually so verbose.
I know. He's just trying to get out of here so fast.
Since our basic changes, we're dealing with the state-required issues
It
of,
it typically is.
that gives us our orders. All right, Dr. Mills?
Yes, ma'am, let me pull up my. I've got. It's not me, I touched the thing. So it goes in. All right, board members and others, I brought some, a little bit of handouts. Dan, you want to help? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I've been bad down here. Keep an eye on Debbie.
I'll try.
Keep an eye on Debbie.
I'm not playing this.
I'm watching.
You
The
watch
eagle eye
Debbie.
over here.
Unless you're quick, you'll just be a witness. It won't be a confrontation.
That's, I can't do anything on the end
I
of the
don't know
table.
about, I don't know about that end of the table.
There are
Just so-
problems. I think you need to send some people down to keep them. We've had complaints.
Well, on
I've got some complaints.
on the to-do list today, there's a,
It's not on
the
there.
last bullet says need to schedule meetings, so I hope that everyone has their calendars with
That's a
them.
given. Board members, what I tried to do was just take what we worked on last time. Remember, I left you with the homework assignment. I didn't bring my gold star chart, so we're on the honor system today. Olivia's laughing at you.
That's not new.
That's not new. I tried to go back through the information from last time and then lay out some of the things I think we need to decide what we want to do, next steps. Mr. Letchworth and I went and had a meeting with the county manager just to touch base on a few things since the March meeting about some of the recommendations. and directions from the board. So I've got that in there too to talk about. And then I've got the topics from last time for you to prioritize if you do want to do that, which I think that's part of it. And then I've also got pieces in there about next steps for some of the school decisions we were talking about to be ready for Frederick Douglass's building, as well as for the new elementary school, and some bits and pieces. So having these interim meetings on a regular basis, you know, you don't have to get too far into the weeds each time, but you are making some progress in doing that. But I want to point out a few things as we go, so you'll kind of know some pinch points. I think they're going to come up rather fast, and some things I need direction on in terms of what's the board's prerogative to go next steps in terms of talking to the county and asking for funding. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so nothing fancy, nothing really new from last time, but I do want to get your input on prioritization of a few things and share a little bit with you. So, got your to-do list. We've talked about that. We've already set some priorities, okay? So, one was to complete items from the field trip with county commissioners. So you'll have RFQs that will be presented at the April board meeting. Those are renovations at auditoriums, the high schools, safety vestibules at Pike and Hunt, and the science labs at the 3 high schools. Okay? Those were what was remaining, and those are coming to you this month, or this coming month. It seems like it's the end of it is, but it's not technically there. The other was you just made a decision about the new track for Hunt, and the RFQ process that can now begin, same scope. And we also talked about constructing the new Frederick Douglass School and renovations to Barnes and Leeward Elementary Schools. That's ongoing as well. Remember, that was phase 1, phase 2, and the county's committed funds to that. So those are already set as priorities if you think about it, okay, because funds have been set aside.
So did the RFQs go out?
For which one?
Well, on the new track for Hunt High School, you've got RFQ process to begin.
Yeah.
Wait,
We received Frederick Douglass today to close out with today at 3 for those. We had 6 on those.
Okay.
okay.
All right. So on the next slide, slide 4, I'll put page numbers on there for you, Dr. Fitch.
Thank you so much.
Try to get ahead of you this time.
That helps.
Yeah. I know. You're going to catch me again. Items from the March meeting, we talked about requesting the county commissioners, and you approved these. These were the outdoor athletic bathroom renovations for Pike, field house construction for Pike and Beddingfield, the middle school outdoor athletic bathroom construction, and the renovation of the field house at Hunt. So you've got some other priorities you've already set aside, okay? Previous slide, remember?
Yep.
We got items from the field trip, we've got the track at Hunt, Frederick Douglass, we're trying to get the needs-based capital funding, and then we've got renovations from Barnes and Lee Woodard. Okay? So I need to know what you would like to do with these priorities as well. We had a discussion with the county last week, Mr. Letchworth and I went, and I know the board has approved these, but my question is, are these part of the priorities as well? Because I think I want to know that you want to go ahead and send these along, because while the track and the field trip items have already been talked about, some of the renovations at Barnes and Lee Woodard are coming in higher than what was expected. And then, of course, the Frederick Douglass is a separate bucket, if you will, of funds that are going to have to come into it. But I need some direction. Now, I can gladly send something along, but it's an italicized conversation with the county, because it comes down to what is it that the board feels it should do first, just what we're getting back from the county manager.
So what are you asking us to, of these priorities, to reprioritize what should come
No, I don't think
first,
there's a
or what?
repriorities, but I just want you to be aware that if we send these along, I think the question's gonna be of the next set that we're talking about doing.
Next set.
And this set, you've got field trip items that, it sounds so funny saying field trip items, so that's a good way to categorize it. You've got field trip items that are gonna be extensive. You've got auditoriums, safety vestibules, which won't be as bad, science labs. You've got another track, and then you've got renovations at Barnes and Lee Woodard. That's a fair chunk of funds.
Yes.
Okay, you've got another set of funds over here for Frederick Douglass that could be coming from the state, or if not, it'll come from local government commission, and the county would have to let funds to do that.
Okay.
All right, so you've got these set aside. Now we've talked about other things we want to do with renovations and restrooms and athletic fields and all. Before we get into the next ones, to prioritize, I just want you to be aware that the discussions at the county level are, these are a lot of things, and they're costly. Okay, so if we go to the next step, when we prioritize the ones for your homework and elsewhere, we've already kind of said by our pacing that the items from the field trip, the tracks, and the renovations in Barnes and Lee Woodard are kind of like the first phase. Then the athletics ones we just talked about at the March meeting will be the next step. But I'm prepared to send those along and request that. But as we start doing that, that's a significant chunk of funding as well. So I kind of need some input for you in terms of the board's pleasure in going ahead and requesting those.
Members of the board?
Looking at the page 4, my suggestion would be new outdoor athletic bathroom construction for all middle schools. While, that is certainly important, I would think that that would be the lowest priority item on that particular list. And there might be some things on the next page that would have a higher priority in my mind.
Yeah, I didn't want the board to come back and go, why haven't we taken this information forward? We talked about it in the March meeting. But I do think that as we do these, then we need to kind of say, these are the ones that next step, because part of the facility plan needs to be, we've got these right now, we want these in the next phase, these in the next phase. And when that's part of the planning process is, we need to talk about what does the planning process look like for our board. Because we're just getting into the weeds of it now, and it's going to get much more cumbersome as we start having multiple buildings and multiple projects, and we're going back when we complete things, because the county's been very open to supporting and wanting to improve facilities. But even when, in terms of the things we just talked about in March, I think we need to prioritize those as we look ahead.
Well, I agree with Mrs. Boyette that the outdoor athletic bathroom construction for all the middle schools needs to be at the lower end of priorities, because as you pointed out at our last meeting, I'm not going to say if, when we get the approval for Frederick Douglass's new building, if we move with the aforementioned plan to let Toys Not serve as the standing ground for those students to be moved to, that may not even continue in the long run to be a middle school, because your projected plan was to use it as the staging area and to possibly let it then become the housing of central office, which would remove it. So if we were to do bathroom facilities at Toys Not included, it becomes a moot point, and we would have spent funds that were not needed for athletics at Toys Not as a middle school.
Oh, I agree with that.
So I agree, Mrs. Boyette, that we need to put that one at the lower end of the priorities that we've already had discussion about.
So in that vein, then, we've got this set of projects that you've already said we want to do these, okay, in some order. Okay. So now we need to get into the next set that was your homework. And we need to take these, along with the ones that are, we talked about from the March meeting, and you need to decide, are these the ones, or is there something else? But these were all projects that's been discussed over the last little bit. Again, remember, we've got 5 and 10-year documents as well, but these are big-ticket items. Again, some of these we've mentioned earlier with savings from the gas lines and the fuel costs, the driveways, and some other things. And some are very global, and some are very specific. So we've got enough on our plate to go to the county now with some projects, and there are some that are underway. But I also need to know from the board, of these, if these are the ones, what's priority? And then we need to start talking to the commissioners about the timing of these things as well. They've been, again, very supportive. It's good we can have those conversations, but it's going to have to be, from the board's perspective, which of these come first. And I will point out, too, that in italics, the painting cycle and the furniture replacement, when Mr. Letchworth and I met with the county last week, these are type items that are seen as kind of normal maintenance items from the school system. So that discussion was geared towards not providing additional funding for that, but that funding would be available once the school system and the district and the board had kind of looked at consolidating facilities. Those funds would be available to do that, rather than allotting funds for a paint cycle or furniture replacement. Okay. So that was kind of the feedback. So I didn't want you to think those were off the priorities list, but that was the feedback that we got. So trying to help you cull down some of your list, but
Well, what's the time frame that it would take to do the installation of the gas lines for Lucama, Rock Ridge, and Springfield?
I would have to check with the contractor to do the install, but I would guess probably 5 to 6 months.
And what would possibly be the earliest we could begin that?
I think it's a matter of the board deciding it, and we'll get back with the contractor and get it started.
And the next would be, with the fuel oil having a cost of 1/3 of the gas cost, would we be saving funds this year in fuel cost so that some of that savings could be applied to the installation of these lines?
So your savings would be in next fiscal year
In the-
for heating? Yes, ma'am.
In the 22-23.
That's correct.
And so those savings possibly could pay for the cost of the installation of those lines?
But a small portion of it.
A small portion of it.
The cost of the lines is pretty significant up front.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just off of some quick math that I did, every line that we run will save about, based on what we've got in our budget, we'll save about $9,000 annually per school.
Okay. And those three, that's 27,000 saved right there.
And what was the rough figure, I was looking through here, that you gave us last time for installing the gas line?
hold on, I've got it in here.
1.2 something.
1.2 million.
It's at the bottom, it's on slide 17.
So-
1.221.
So it would save about that 0.2 of that 1.7, or 1.22.
It's at the
In
back
terms
end,
of
and
cost?
I left you
So
some
it-
supplemental stuff in
What,
case
we
you
talking
need.
about 5, 6 years to get it back?
It'd be longer
Based
than
on
that.
today's fuel costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically,
But also get us closer to unified heating and air among our schools. for what it's worth, out of the priorities listed on slide 5, installation of gas lines would probably be my top priority.
I agree.
Well, it's one of them that we're getting savings and paid back. The others making my larger outlays.
Would you, that was certainly my number one. Ms. Powell, would you look at number one as being the gas lines for those 3 schools?
Definitely, after I heard the savings, that would be, yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Now, when you talk about the need for expansion of Rock Ridge, New Hope,
Yeah, I think
based
that,
on the plans of the city and the county, are we in time crunch so that we need to start that right away? Or do we have a year or 2 years down the road to look at that?
you've got some time based on the ORID study to do that, but I do think you need to go ahead and start having conversations with the county about what you may want to do out in that area, because the land is going to be your issue over time. I mean, those schools have been historically at capacity and will stay that way. That's what the projections are, and they're not gonna vary. But I think as you start looking at priorities, we need to have that conversation about things we need to do to land bank or whatever for those schools over time, in addition to the new building. So I think that needs to be some balance that the board seeks with some of that. Otherwise, you're going to have everything kind of in place, and then you're going to come back to one big issue to deal with again. It's going to be putting out fires.
I also think that we need to, I hate to say consider, but while we're considering the need for expansion at Rock Ridge and New Hope, I think that needs to be lumped into the rear driveway as well, rather than consider them 2 different priorities.
Well, you've got some land at New Hope to handle some of the expansion, but you got the driveway would have to be sited so that it allows for that. You do have the safety issues there too. And you've got some of that that's going to start happening at Rock Ridge, and is already, you've seen some stacking up there too, but the land around that as well. So I think that as you're setting these priorities, then the board needs to think about, is that, in a year, is that in 2 years, is, those kinds of things, because I think that's what the county's going to want to hear is, when are you coming to ask for these things? These make sense, but we need to plan. So is that 2 years from now? Is that 3 years from now, or what? So I think that's what we're needing to get down, to take to them and talk to them. And I think that will go a long way.
In our meeting with them, they said that they were considering a 3rd school in 2025, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that 2025 was when the debt service for Jones would be done.
Yeah. Again, maybe that would be a good project to look at that point.
Good.
I think that we're thinking along the same lines, and we're talking about the gas lines would be the first priority, but instead of just doing nothing for the others, let's say the following year, we're looking at a plan for New Hope to what we do our driveway and expand that, and in the meantime be looking at some land and that we might need to expand Rock Ridge. In other words, to be able to do everything on the list. I'm not talking about annual funding for athletic facilities, but that might be the longest term one. But we could say, hey, this is what we're looking at, this is what we need, 1 year, 2 years.
I think you need to, I think just saying we need this, that everyone would agree you need it. It's a safety issue, it's a savings issue, but I think that they're waiting for you to tell them which one is your priority, and they've been very supportive. So, and I don't think anyone can tell you which one is the best for whatever, nor can I. So I think the board as a collective needs to say, these are what we believe, and from the feedback you're getting and the things that you're seeing, is we can certainly provide information and go back, and that's why I think the pacing of what we're doing is good. It gives us time to go back and look at some things, but with as tight as things are and as busy as everyone is with the construction and the planning that's taken just to get materials on now, laying something out over this period of time is going to be really helpful to you. But also, I think it'll allow people to know and plan for, we know this is coming, and we can plan for disruptions and good disruptions, but also be able to tell people what we're trying to do to make things, look better and be better. So definitely what I'm hearing from you now is we want to go ahead and get some either more current or more specific information about the gas lines and that project and how it may tie in with something that the county may want to do right away. Is that one of the first ones you want to do outside the projects we've got going? I think everybody was in agreement with that.
I prioritized this request for gas lines 1. 2, the rear driveway with New Hope, and then to partner with that, the expanded growth for New Hope and Rock Ridge. So I did that a 2 and a 2A, because I think if land became available tomorrow, it needs to be, we need to be able to deal with that, because it may not sit forever. And then I put 3 for paint cycle and 4 for furniture, but I see those as being a pair together. And my very last is the annual funding for the athletic facilities, once we have taken care of those things that we've already looked at.
And to be honest, with what you're doing with the process, and you've been clear about taking input and looking at things, these aren't the end-all lists. You've got a whole lot of things that you can go back through and revisit, and we've got time to do that. But you've got some big-ticket things that are pretty low-hanging fruit to grab initially, and that gives us time to go back through that and work through it. But these are some, I think, that have always been coming up, at least a couple of them, that would make sense from planning. The thing I hear a lot is Jones is built large, it's got plenty of space, but you're still going to run out of space over time in those two communities with the buildings that we're seeing and the growth that we're seeing. So that's not going to be a bad move to go ahead and address some of those in the next little bit, whatever the board decides the next little bit is. So.
And when we talk about the painting cycle, let me see. Blake and I looked at some, I don't mean one school.
No.
I mean, let's do several, hire some contractors and get in there.
That's the only way.
Let's get our schools
You come in and
painted
you
and
gotta
looking
do
like they ought to.
you gotta do a handful of them all at once, total.
And like the same thing with the furniture, some of them would have, that hadn't been replaced in
Eons.
Well,
It just doesn't
to
work.
me, if we can't afford to do, let's say we want to, say it's a 5-year cycle, I don't know, do a 5th of them. If we can't afford to do a 5th of them every year, how are we going to be able to do 2/5 next year or 3/5 the next year if we aren't doing it?
which put us in the problem,
That
with
we
the
in
problem
now.
we have
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Yes, you can't, we've been playing catch-up with activity buses, we've been playing catch-up with some other things like that, and it's doable, but that's a large-scale thing. But we do need to do that, along with making decisions about some of the other facilities that would come off of your upkeep and maintenance as you go. So you're gonna have to do both.
Well, as you look at your paint cycle and your furniture replacement, then Mr. Letchworth and his crew should be able to tell us if it's a 5-year cycle or a 4-year cycle, which ones need to be done first, which ones need to be the second tier, which one needs to be the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, because they know what the painting needs are and where the least need happens to be and whatever is the least, it could be at the bottom of the cycle, but certainly whatever is the most, go to the top of that cycle.
Yeah, I don't want to do patchwork. I don't want to do a little bit at a time. I want to go in top to bottom and do a complete facility. That's the only way you're going to catch up, and I want it done right. You know, the last conversation we had was a while back, but it was a 7-year cycle, was what, 1.3 million or something. That's probably gone up. So, I mean, it takes something to catch up, but if we can start allocating that and doing that. Again, we've got to save somewhere else to do that if we're not getting those additional
Is a
funds.
7-year cycle too long?
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's,
what would be the ideal cycle?
it's not
5 years?
5, it's not 7.
7 is what we
Well,
used
so
to
what we-
be
Yeah,
on.
7 was what it used to be on, yeah.
But are we on a 5-year cycle?
We're on,
We're not
we're
on
on.
this
We're still on it,
Uh,
right. We're
We
still
fell
on
off the cycle.
We're on a 21-year
Corey said we
cycle.
fell off the
Yeah.
cycle. So,
And I mean, and these are things that, you know, once we commit to them, it's much like what we do with other things in the school system. You've got to commit to it and know that's going to be part of your budget each year, so it can't just be found funds with a grant or
Right.
one-time rainy day funds. I don't think that's how that's going to get us out of the hole, and so we really need to lay this down and stick to it and go and say, this is what we need. That's part of the conversation.
Dr. Mills?
Yes, sir.
Didn't we just spend $2.5 million of the ESSER money on desks?
Haven't spent it yet.
Mm-mm.
Well, we're about to.
But that's a drop in the sea for what it would take to really start replacing the furniture at schools, because again, that's been an area where you very rarely see new furniture come in schools.
that's why when you go out, you see furniture that might have been there when you were there, or somebody else was there long-term when you say,
It is
"Yeah."
extremely costly.
Yeah.
It is, but it needs to be done too on a regular cycle.
And we did hear a couple of times about how poor our seating is for parents or for, I mean, and it's an important event when they come to see
Yeah.
the
Yes.
students, and we don't want them to sit on the floor.
No. I mean, you get $1 million a year given from the county. It wouldn't take, you could take half that and allocate each year, and it would still be patchworking stuff, but it would be a start. But again, it's going to take an investment over time to really get us back to what it needs to be.
And I'm glad we're doing this too, because if we had been doing the painting cycle and furniture replenishment, replacement, then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now with our schools. Because there was
No.
once upon a time when we had painting going on every summer in the
Yes.
schools.
Well-
There was replacement school, and we weren't able to do that. But I'm glad to see, because that was the first two things when I looked at the priority list that jumped out at me,
Yeah.
was looking at the painting and the furniture replacement. And then, of course, looking at a way to be safe, for our students to be safe in the schools, and think about the gas lines. And then looking at saving money, which was the gas lines, but the safe would be the rear driveway at New Oaks Elementary School, making sure our students get in and out safely. So safety and savings of money is always something important too. But I'm glad that we're doing this.
So what I've heard you say so far is gas lines, and then it gets a little muddy on this page. So anybody want to? I've heard a couple of different.
I'd really like to see us request an increase in our capital outlay,
Okay,
and that, to take care of
to earmark towards some of the.
painting cycle and furniture replacement.
And again, I think what you're going to hear is that, some of those funds will be available to us once we consolidate schools, and we're not spreading the same amount of funds over X number of schools versus Y number of schools. I just think you need to prepare yourself for that.
I agree, but I also think that, some of those, that depending on how the cycle is structured,
Right.
that's something we can meet later. And I mean, the good thing about furniture is furniture for the most part is fungible. So we could take new furniture at one and put it at another.
Well, it definitely lasts if you look at the stuff we're using.
Yeah, Miss Barnes still found her old desk.
Each one is the-
And it's not, I mean, it's kind of funny, but it shouldn't be funny.
Would you like for us to come back with what a painting cycle might look like in cost that's reasonable and useful?
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
let me
that's one
ask you
thing.
this, does a painting cycle, might not mean X number of schools, because to paint Lee Woodard and to paint Fike High School, for example, you're talking about, enormous difference, I would suspect. So, but you could break it down into a cycle by having small and
There's a couple
large
different ways
schools, I
to
would
do it.
suspect. So,
But-
yes, I would like to see what a
Okay.
cycle would look like and the cost would say.
I would too.
But again, I think that's a good idea, and I had that conversation too. I just think you need to prepare yourself for what the response may be. But that doesn't preclude you from asking and saying why. I mean, these are still conversation pieces.
But the comment was made that if we don't ask,
I agree. So,
Well, it's just like your house, You got to paint your house. You got to sometimes replace furniture. It's something you have to do. Sometimes it comes at inappropriate times. And you have to go in your savings account and get some money out for it. And with the cost of everything, it's increasing a lot more to do any of this now with what the COVID has left us in the state.
so if we were to work through various scenarios for paint cycle and costs that would get us caught back up and regular, as well as that for furniture, is that something else the board would like? I mean, I know it's on here, but
Yeah, I would put them both in.
bring that back sooner than later, so if you are gonna request that, I mean,
Those two go together.
okay. So we're back to, and we've talked about so the gas lines is number one, and then do you want to see the driveway as something second, considering the expansion issues are a little bit later down the
Well,
road?
I think that,
Or bundle?
I don't know how long we can expect to, get by with the drive, and with the pickup line in a situation like it is, because at New Hope, sometime it gets out on 58 highway,
sometimes, every day.
and,
And I know this is probably the inappropriate time to do that, but I think you could alleviate a lot of that if you extended the pickup line through the area that nobody's allowed to drive through and sort of like loop it around. Because there's the first driveway that nobody's supposed to enter in, and then there's the main driveway, and then there's a big plot of nothing. And I really feel like if you extended where the car line goes through that area where no one parks, it's just grass, I think that would alleviate some of the 58 overflow, or Pack House Road overflow.
We'd have to look at that, but that's something we can look at.
I look at it every time I drive. I go pick up my kids.
We know you're a problem everywhere you go, we know.
No,
could do like,
I looked at it too. I went through there one after, and I thought, why could we not have? But so I know exactly where you're talking
could
about.
do like.
Y'all been carpooling again, the pickup line?
Tell Rich Charles, I'm gonna get there at quarter after.
We can look at that. But I do think in the grand scheme of things, having that rear driveway would be much safer
I don't
coming in.
disagree.
You're gonna need to do that eventually anyway. But we can look at that. Okay, so we okay on this one then? I've got something to go back and work with on this one, bring this back to you, but
And as far as we're talking about bundling the New Hope, because that needs to go together, but at the same time, couldn't we just sketch out, or how much land would it need, how many square feet are we gonna need, how much could we put, just a sketch or some idea
that's what I would like. I
of
think
what
we
we
need
would
to,
do.
I think you need to have something visual for people to see versus we need to expand or we need some more, whatever. I think you need a little bit of, not drawn to scale, not construction documents, but something that would show what a footprint might look like, or
Right.
so people can anchor to something more reasonable than imagination.
And when, there is already one mobile unit at Rock Ridge, so are there any at New Hope so far?
There's
Two.
Two.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's
Okay.
two right behind
the
it.
music
Okay.
room and somebody
It's
else.
right between those walls, yeah.
But anticipating when, assuming if we do go through the Rock Ridge parking lot, the extension, that would be the natural, well, the only way I
There's the
know
only
you
way,
can
yeah.
extend. Then that's gonna mess up their,
Car line.
car line because they have.
That's where they
woven
stack.
it.
That's the
Yes.
only reason you're not hearing about them is because
Uh-huh.
they stack in there. Otherwise, we'd have the same issue there as we do at New Hope. It'd be
But-
out on the road.
But we need to be, have a plan, something's sketched out so that we are ready when they say we have some money
And,
or.
which goes
whenever.
back to, I think,
Here we go.
when you're ready and when you say these are your priorities at X, we need to be able to show them and say why this is your priority and when you think it does and have those conversations ahead of time. Because right now, it's kind of willy-nilly, and I don't think that's what we need.
And I agree, we should cut down on the willy-nilly.
No more willy-nilly.
Okay,
So we can bring some of that back and we can take some of the designs that we have and have some assistance laying out footprints. They were all built to allow to do that. I mean, they were set up to do that. But I think also, if you look at the growth in those areas, even that's going to be,
difficult.
yeah, because where you're going to build them is where you park the buses and the cars at some of these spots. And so you're going to need more space there. Good problems to have.
Okay.
Okay, so now we get into, we talked about a couple different things last time, and these are gonna be a little bit more involved. But I think what's important is, and I'll go through these with you and share a little bit with you. So, we talked about the ORID study, talking about Winstead could be consolidated with Vincent Bynum. We talked about that last time too. I think you could also look at Daniels Learning Center being reassigned to the new portion of Winstead. That was a newer part of the discussion last time. And you could close Daniels as where it is now. It's a two-story building. You could put that program and that facility at the Winstead facility. But you would need commitment from the commissioners to do the demolition for the two-story building, which does not need to have any investment put into it. It's time to go on that one. You remember we deferred the windows on that? And the changes on the footprint on that. And again, Winstead, you've got a school that's right down the street from Vincent Bynum. And ORID showed us that already. And then we talked about Toysnot could serve as the interim location for Frederick Douglass, and you could reassign staff and students to Darden, Elm City, and Forest Hills. Certainly, students, staff could go a lot of different places, but there's certainly homes for them everywhere with the staffing at middle schools. And I think the conversation for Frederick Douglass is it's not a matter of if we get the funding for needs-based. You're going to have funding either through needs-based or through the county for that school, which is wonderful. It'd be certainly much better for all of us if it comes to the needs-based. But I think it was how many, what's the numbers again? I can't keep them straight in my head. It was billions of dollars, 200-something billion dollars worth of requests, and there's 300-something million dollars available. So, I mean, it's competitive. Everyone's heard about it now. So, I think it's going to take them a little bit longer maybe to get through their review, but, it could be, they're talking about mid-April, could be mid-May, but either way, we're going to find out real quick about that, and that will go fast either way once we do that.
They just need to start at the end of the alphabet.
That would be good.
That would be wonderful.
Let's hope Zebulon didn't apply.
Whisper that a little louder to them.
So we got those. So I'm thinking we need to know, and I think we being the board and the district needs to know, because I think you're going to need to talk to the commissioners in a timeline for these school usages to be ready to talk about that at the budget meeting. I think if we go in there, and I've got that on the next slide, but if you look at Toys Not as the holding or interim school for Frederick Douglass, which would alleviate a lot of concerns that you're going to have if you try to look at mobile units. It won't work on site. You can't do it. You can't put them at Elm City Middle. You'd have to find land that would serve a purpose of putting mobile units and rent the mobile units or lease them for at least 2 years. Then you've got buses and transportation issues. We were just talking about somewhere else. It'll be a nightmare if you could find it. So all those are lost costs as you go. So we're going to have to do something. Again, good problem to have, but problems nonetheless. So if you did subsume Toys Not, Daniels is one you don't have to do, but you could do. Winston is one that would address some concerns from the commissioners in terms of the building and the consolidation, your efficiencies, and usage of facilities. But even if you do those, that's really not going to address a lot of the capacity and efficiency issues from the ORD report at the elementary level, and I think that's going to come up.
Could we direct ORID to find the most suitable location for the construction and consolidation of elementary schools, given our current elementary school sites?
Yes, they do new school siting. There's consultants and organizations in addition to ORID and ORID that will do new school siting.
So you talked about new school siting. When you say new school siting, what are you referring to?
So sort of like what we're doing out at Frederick Douglass. So I think one of the things we talked about in the board in our joint meeting with the county commissioners was if we were talking about consolidating schools,
Okay.
if we could find one of those schools with a suitable footprint on which to build a new school that could then consolidate the student populations of 2 schools or 3 schools.
Okay, so when we were having the conversation of Stantonsburg, Gardner's, that conversation, okay.
Or somewhere on the eastern side
Yes.
of the county, because the western side has gotten new
Kept out.
schools.
Is that the majority of the board feel that way? I mean, I think in determining a location or an area, general area, and I've got this on the next slide, which is the first bullet. You need to have a plan for the new elementary school construction, including a general idea of an area. And I would agree. I think it's got to be somewhere on this side of the county if you're looking at what you've been talking about and what ORD had provided us. And I think we need to have that discussion and some of the priorities you're talking about by the May 3rd meeting with the commissioners, at least a general understanding of where you want to go.
Okay.
Don't think you have to have everything nailed down to the nth degree, but if we're going to go and look at getting their approval for another elementary school, then we need to start the process to grab a consultant and start looking at the planning areas and the changes and the availability of land and the infrastructure along with our existing schools in the fall. And that means that you can start the process in the spring.
Can we, when we looked at land for Jones Elementary, there was enough land purchased so that for a need in the future, an elementary school, there would be enough land to house and
Yeah,
not
you could look at land
only
banking.
But we were able to buy enough land so that if there's a need for a middle school in that area, that the land was already there in ours to be able to expand that footprint.
I was involved with that in my role when I was here before as an assistant superintendent, and that was one of the things, trying to find land that would have enough to build that campus out for a middle school, and you did have some land banking at that time. There's nothing to stop the board from going ahead and making some decisions about the location of a new elementary school, provided the county commissioners provide the funding for it, at the same time as you're doing Frederick Douglass, because you're not having to shut a school down to do that. You know, Frederick Douglass is going to be reconstructed on its own site, so it's got to go somewhere else for the time being. But if you're looking at building a nice, new, inviting school, which the commissioner says is what they want, you can build that while we're still going to school in the other buildings and have all that phased in, much like what we're doing with Watt. So some of those decision points can be later on in the process, but you can't wait on the decision point of the general area and a location and purchasing land or getting land to do it. And that could happen very quickly. I mean, the county manager is quick to find funding and quick to make things happen with that. So we can run those projects concurrently, you know, Frederick Douglass and another new elementary school. And it's a wonderful blessing to have support to go ahead and do that elsewhere. I do think you still have to make some decisions about some of the existing schools that we talked about, though, because if we go back and request some funds for land or to begin construction and siting and RFQs and such, then you've got to have in hand what you want to do with some of the other schools we talked about that would, we talked about on the previous slides, of these could be used for X or these could be consolidated. I mean, I do think that's part of the discussion. And I think that was clear from the commissioners' meeting as well, too. Some of this is you've got work to do and you've got to make some decisions. So I don't want us to, you know, I can bring you back several different companies to talk to about the school siting and the new school location piece, and they do good jobs. There's multiples. But at the same time, the decisions about a couple of the schools we talked about need to go ahead and take place, because that's going to affect the timing of some of the other things that we need to do. And I think the commissioners are going to ask for that for you for some of the funding for the next projects.
Dr. Mills,
Yes, sir.
I agree with you about the existing schools and what we're going to do. But in talking about a new school, while the schools can exist and operate but identifying the area that it's going to be in and identifying maybe down to the exact property, does that not need to be done in a manner in closed session? I mean, when it gets down to the details.
Yeah, when it gets down to details, it does.
I mean, the fact that we're going to do it, I mean, I don't have a problem, but
not in picking the firm and the
The
process
firms
you want to
and-
use and which one you feel comfortable with, and going through and starting the process.
because the price of land can change quite a bit if somebody thinks my spot is the ideal spot and the one they want.
It would likely change.
So,
It would definitely change.
so, I mean, while I think we need, in general terms, we need to be open about it, but at the same time,
Yes.
for the sake of being good stewards of the dollar, we need to be confidential about parts of it too.
That is true. That's what your attorney will tell you as well.
That's correct.
I know the one thing that we discussed too is before we decide to close schools and make changes, excuse me, we were still going to have input from the public
You do.
to set that up. And I think we probably need to start thinking about when we're going to do that, to have our community meetings.
I think you can have the input, and I think you need to have that. But at the same time, I think we're going to have to make some decisions about which of these options you want to put forward to the community. I mean, it is at the point where, as we go forward with the next construction. You've got Frederick Douglass is going to do construction. You've got commissioners saying they will build a new elementary school. But we've got to consolidate some schools to do that. When that comes up, that means you've got to reassign students at some level to do that. So if you're doing that, you got to get input. What are you putting forward to get input on? Which means you got to back it up and make a decision ahead of time. And I think in the meantime, as our part of our facility planning, we set some priorities today. We've already got a healthy chunk of projects going on. But I think that the board should have a general idea of what some options are going forward. And I think by the time we get to the budget meeting, we should have some things kind of out there that we're in timelines to show that we've done some things that we were planning to do. We've got some momentum, because I think that's going to affect the time frame for some of the fundings and some of the other things and keep us rolling. So we started to make some progress. You know, Frederick Douglass is going quickly. You know, that's going to, either way, whichever funding source we go with, Watt's going to be on time. We've got funding for the renovations. We've got funding for some other projects. That's all good, but you know, I can lay out the time frame for everything, but we've got to know what you want to do. And I don't think we need to get into another school year where we don't have some things that we can talk about and get that work done. I think that's going to slow us down.
Yes, that's true. I was just talking about before we make the final
Yeah,
decision.
oh yeah, sure.
We have to
Oh,
have
no.
something to bring to the public, you know.
No,
some-
you would never
some
do
scenarios.
that. And this board has never done that, nor I think would any board want to do that. But I do think, you know, as much as we've looked at some of the things today and priorities, and again, I told you this would be kind of a rehash meeting in a sense, we got to go ahead and lay some things out and be able to articulate those as we go into the next phase.
Because I was thinking about the situation with the Reed Street pool. They were having
Sure.
meetings about that, and the community gave their input kind of after the fact. And I don't want us to be in that type of situation.
I think also we got to talk to folks about the Toys Not usage of that building. That's gonna involve some shift, and that's something we need to publicize if and when we get to that point. But you know, that's not been finalized. That'll affect staff and students. There's lots of moving pieces. That's an important part of new facilities and growth and change, and that's all good. But if we articulate why and get ahead and share it, you know, that's going to be much better, and it won't work the other way. But at the same time, we've got to do some things with these elementary schools to really get going, because we can't do the new one until we decide what to do with some of our existing ones.
Right. So is Dr. Mills already coming back to present to us?
ORED is done with our
Okay.
current contract, so
Oh, okay.
that is done. So what we need to do some now for, or somebody, and I can go back and bring some and send it, is citing of a new school. Because, I mean, they can look at the same numbers, they can pull the same numbers, whoever does it, or if ORED does it. All the data's still there. It won't take long to do that. But again, they're gonna ask about things such as what kind of school is it, which schools are you consolidating, because it's gonna be distance to school, transportation, infrastructure pieces and parts, they're gonna take in all that. So all these things are commingled again. So all this is predicated on, what do you wanna do with X, Y, and Z?
Well, you indicated that you're familiar with not only ORED, but other entities.
There's a couple others that do
That
it.
do the same thing. Would another entity have to go back and redo what ORED has done to get to that point? Or would we be better off using ORED, who has already pulled together a lot of our data, even though some of their construction areas and all were not as up-to-date as it needed to be, and we sent them back asking them to consider some of those factors. Where would you?
I think ORED is probably the most used one in the state, because they're out of the NC State, And, you know, they're familiar with the data sources and they're reasonable. Some of the firms that you may use may be from out of state, you're gonna pay travel and things such as that, and timing of it as well, too. I'd have to check with them, see what their time frame is. But, you know, the same process is in effect, and again, data files are readily available, GIS files are readily available. They've already done the land use study down here, so they know a lot of the players. But other than that, a lot of it's the analysis and running it, and then your input about kind of where, and again, your input from, these are the things we're gonna make changes with. So, but I found them to be the most reasonable of the firms I've looked at. I've looked at some out of state and in-state, of the companies that do that.
Well, whoever we use, I don't think they need to bring us one scenario.
And I know that's a concern for you.
And say, this is it and what you have to do, because that's
Sure.
what got us in the situation where people are feeling that their school is being closed or whatever. So we need to have at least a couple of scenarios for consideration to be had.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
And with that in mind, I would think we could give them some direction, like we want Jones School to be used, you know,
Yes, footprint.
fully.
Yes.
And then let's look at, and the ones that we're spending money on right now in the phase 1 and phase 2, we
That
don't
was
want
part
to.
of the conversation.
Right.
Okay, and then let's look at what's left.
Right.
And maybe prioritize one, you know, somewhere in the city
Or eastern part or
uh-huh,
whatever.
and,
yes.
and then look at a second one, you know, that would be the third school that we were looking at somewhere.
Right, you could go ahead and do that at the same time with that data wouldn't change much over time for some of the siting. Yes, I can give you some feedback and some pieces and parts on that to let you look at before I would send anything to ORED or whomever
But
from some things I've done in the past and from folks who do it too.
But, you know, it just makes sense that we're not gonna just, you know.
You don't just say, hey, go find
We
it.
know we want
You just
to
don't
fill
go
up
find some
zones.
school, no, you got to give them some
And
direction.
then after we had where we wanted a school, some suggestions for schools, then once we decide that, then our long-term, if there are other schools that need repairs done to them, then we could
That
go
would
ahead
matter.
and get them
Right,
online to get them.
for the work to be
Mm-hmm.
done.
Yeah, everything's connected. You're right, everything's connected.
Dr. Mills,
Yes, sir.
so as far as the moving forward piece, yeah, I like what you've got with Winstead, consolidating it into Benson Bond. In every scenario that ORED gave us, Winstead was gonna be consolidated. And the only thing is that I really like Daniels going into Toy Spot. And then that would free up 2 buildings that we don't have to maintain from that point.
Yeah, that's something we would need to look at, because that was a piece, I mean, that's,
I don't think you could put Daniels and Toys Not at the same time that you consolidate. Or
no,
you use Frederick Douglass.
no, I would not. I would
Well,
not
you could
put
do
it.
that afterwards.
You could.
And, yeah, I think that we probably need to come to some kind of agreement or thought process on that before we go to the county commissioners and ask for more projects, because, I mean, they're putting their best foot forward and we need to do the same.
I do think that's a valid point, and I do agree with you. From the feedback I've gotten so far, I think you're gonna need to have some direction. I do think Ms. Boyett's comments about the process for choosing a new school location, yes, I think we should definitely always give them anything we want to use, and also that's gonna help them make a better decision, because you're gonna have input in that, but also each time you do that, that's gonna affect which ones you would want to do next in your planning, from the age or the issues you're dealing with in your 5 and 10-year plan. So there's no problem with doing that. But again, it circles back to what you're saying, Mr. Borkin, which is you got to go ahead and act on some things if that's what you're going to do, because it's going to be separate.
So,
That part would be.
so Ms. Boyette, I'm sorry, not Ms. Boyette, Mr. Borkin, in your scenario, you would like Daniels at Toys Not. Does Daniels need all of Toys Not?
No,
Not
that'll be
all
like
of
a
Toys
part
Not,
of
just
it.
a wing of it. If
With-
central office were to move to
Okay,
Toys Not.
okay, all right.
That would be long range, because again, we'll be building schools over the next little bit because of the support of the commissioner, so you need a temporary school to hold some of the other ones if we were to have that, so.
Okay, and you would not have Winston used at all?
I would not.
Okay.
And that would be, I would agree with him there, because that would be a big savings, you know, because.
It would be. Yeah, the only section you've got is the newer section from 80-something. There's about 8 classrooms, media center, computer lab, and some of the offices. Yeah.
So
But
his,
the cafeteria and everything in this 2-story building, it's not adequate.
so on page 6, the, would you be looking at all of Winston being demolished? Because on page 6, they talk about using the newer section.
I would, I mean, this is just me personally.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is nothing that I take lightly.
And y'all need to discuss it, that's
But-
what I'm saying.
But I would request that the county commissioners demolish the entire
The
school
entire school.
and reutilized it for something that would be another benefit to the community.
Okay. Okay, so I see, and then using Toys Not to eventually be both central office as well as utilization for Daniels.
Yes, ma'am.
And we would have to assess that for space and everything, but we'd have time to do that.
Okay.
Dr. Mills?
Yes, ma'am.
Question. I know we're not using ORED, we're going to use another type of company, but is there any way we can have someone come in and talk to us about more about the growth on the east side of Wilson? I know we talked about FedEx was coming, and I've heard a few other places are coming too from the city, but is there any way we can get someone to come down or share with us information about the growth on the east side?
You could have the city or county planning offices might come share some stuff. They've been good to work with, and we reached out to them here locally.
Yeah.
We sat down with Roger Lentz and looked at some information, and the county planning offices is always great to us too. So I can make contact with them. Dr. Williams and I went and talked to Mr. Lentz, and then anytime I've asked the county office for GIS from way back in the days when I had hair to now, they're great to work with.
Yeah, can we do that?
Sure.
I think that would help us in
Sure.
making our decisions, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can I understand what you said at the beginning? Did you say, because we're not going to use ORED and we're going to look at somebody else? Is that how you prefaced
Well,
She
your
said yes.
You said
statement?
that the contract ended with ORED.
The contract has ended with them, but that does not say that we cannot enter a new contract with them.
Oh, okay.
He said that in addition to ORED, there were other entities. And so my question was, would somebody else have to go back and do the very same things that ORED has already done and is familiar with our system? But he did not say that we're not through with ORED.
Right, right. I
Okay.
jumped ahead. When I heard contract ended,
Right.
that meant to me, okay, we stopped using them, but you're right, that we can also use them in
I
other
know what you mean
Okay,
in
Yeah,
terms
but
of
I
that.
just meant because
I
you said
just,
it ended. Yeah.
since I didn't want the minutes
I
to say, oh, we're not going to use ORED.
Right. Thank you for correcting me.
Okay.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Mr. Breen, you're sitting there with this, I want to say something, but I'm not.
Well, I just hope ORED's not sick of us.
Is not sick of us?
Not sick of us. But my other thought before deciding how tired of us they may or may not be, I would like to see not memorializations, but summaries of the meetings that y'all are having with planning, so that way we're armed with that information.
Yeah, the meeting so far has been just requests for some information. Much like what we showed last time, that we didn't get into the details because they really weren't needed at this point. But they're our local county and city folks are very helpful to providing any information that you need, that they can provide. And of course, there's certain business dealings I'm sure they can't share, but I mean, it's nothing but a phone call, and they'll share with anyone. And I think we're very lucky in that respect.
I think everybody's on the same page
Yeah.
more than anything, which is something you can't say for
And
multi-government
they
agencies.
they do take their time and walk you through and explain it and show you the patterns. And again, that they're allowed to, but any information we get, we'll definitely summarize and give to you. I don't know about street names on the maps now. Let's don't go that far.
Ms. Boykin, you good?
Well, you can always
So,
write.
I mean, the only question I have is when we would look at going into closed session to discuss a potential second site.
We got a little bit of work to do before we get that far, but I think what I heard you do today is we got the priorities for some of the other projects left. So I can pull those together and we can finalize those some more. The paint cycle and the furniture cycle, you wanted a couple of different methods of that with the costs associated with that to look at least. And then the last is to make contact with ORED or another firm to look at a possible siting process or contract to determine the next location for an elementary school based on the conversation you've had with the county commissioners.
One or two.
One or two. Yeah, I was gonna throw that in there too. Ever the
You
optimist.
said up to 3.
Yeah.
I know, that's why I keep saying two.
I ain't gonna say
Frederick
3.
Douglass is one.
I'll throw 2, but I
And
think
then
And then
3,
they said 2 or 3.
3 includes Frederick Douglass. Let's
Yes.
not go crazy.
Yes.
Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, 1, I
And then
know.
another 1 or
Y'all
2.
need to stop.
Right.
I'm trying to summarize here.
I'm
You're
a
killing
first
me.
grade teacher.
1. But I do want to bring back to you, again, is we need to look at some of these items to meet again once I get this stuff that we talked about today, because I do think we need to have a better understanding of what the board is intended to do, at least as some of the things y'all have mentioned going into the budget meeting, because I think that's going to be a question asked. And I do not want to not be prepared to provide what would help the board move forward in the process.
Mr. Mercer,
Yes, ma'am.
you good?
I'm all right.
Because what I think that may help, and if you're okay with this, I'm giving you kind of a rough timeline, but I think I need to prepare with help a more detailed timeline of some of the things that need to happen for the Toys Not change if you're going to do that. And again, this is all out in the spring of next year, provided we get the funding and designs are done and all. But once all this happens, a lot of this stuff's going to be happening at the same time. You could have multiple projects going on, and so it's going to be important that we're ahead of this. And it sounds like we have a lot of time. We do not. It's not going to be a lot of time. So I want to bring back some decision points again with you, because I'm going to keep putting this ahead and asking for that, because I think we're going to need to let people know and talk about that so people are prepared and understand what it is and what it is not. That's some of the battle.
Well, I would think that when we can lock in on Frederick Douglass particularly,
Yeah.
we need to with regards to toys not, which still breaks my heart, but I understand.
I know.
Does not need to be during the school year.
No, it cannot, and I put this in your handout, just some timeline pieces, some of those. We cannot move anything like that in the middle of the year because it's a double move
Yes.
on top of it. I mean, even if you wanted to, that's just not ideal. And we really need to have plenty of time to let parents and students know and staff know, and you got to move things in and things out and divide them across 3 schools possibly. I mean, that's a lot of logistics. In addition to the normal projects you want to get done during the year and the other projects that are going on, like the Watt building would be finishing up. So there's tons of stuff going on. Again, great problem to have, but
Well,
logistical nightmare.
I would like to think that, in the process, probably one of the most underused facilities is Darden Middle. And with Toys Not, if that changes, we can look at it hopefully from a standpoint to make the best use of, helping increase the student population at Darden.
Well, there's, that is also something we need to talk about too, is the reassignment of those students, if that's what the board decides to do going forward, which I think you're gonna need to do, is, you've got about 300 something students at Toys Not. And then, Darden, Elm City and Forest Hills are closest to that assignment area. So if you're looking at keeping them within contiguous areas and doing those assignments, you know, somebody's gonna need to do the assignment piece of that, to do that process. That's one school, but you're gonna wanna notice folks to do that and have that, input, or at least that awareness, if you will. But I do think that all those schools can handle that balance easily, because I remember when they were much larger than that. And I think it would address some things with some of the staffing and some of the other issues, but we need to do that early on. And so we're ahead of that before we get in the middle of some of the other projects that are all going to come do at once. So I'll bring you some more homework.
So you're good where we are at this point?
I am. When is our next meeting scheduled?
Well, we haven't scheduled it.
And then that's the next thing we need to do.
All right, members of the board, you can,
April 13th.
I thought it was something around there.
was that, was,
Yeah,
that
we did
was
put
the,
something on the
okay.
calendar for April 13th.
Mm-hmm.
We were scheduled for 1 o'clock this Wednesday, but you
There's
said
no
that
way.
one.
Yeah, there's no way.
Folded into this.
Mhm.
Okay, so yes, the next one is the 13th of April.
So I will have some information for you on the things we discussed then and some of the prioritizations. But I also think that, and I'll have made contact with some of the companies, or at least the board, about the next steps.
Okay.
And we'll know about our needs-based, the 12th,
I
April.
hope they'll be that close on time. I don't know, with so many applications, I'm not sure.
That's some good news for the 13th.
That'd be nice.
Okay. So 1 o'clock on the 13th of
Mhm.
April is still
I thought
whatever
we
with
put one down.
accreditation as well as facilities work session. Okay. Anything else to claim our time today? Hearing nothing, the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Madam Chair, I move for adjournment.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Green, seconded by Mr. Mercer, that we adjourn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, let it be known by the sign of aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Let the record reflect that the motion carries unanimously. We are now adjourned.